Ma'am, that section is reserved for pre-boarded passengers. I have my boarding pass seat 2A, and I've been here since boarding began.
Finally, the plane was ready for takeoff.
Welcome
The
aboard,
beautiful
Miss
evening was
Brooks.
over. It was
Your
night.
seat is ready.
New crew passed around the cabin in muted efficiency, solid reminders that accountability was more than mere words. The executive grasp was gone, but the emotional hold on everyone aboard was going to remain a lot
Your boarding
longer.
pass shows
Danielle
seat
Ashworth
2A.
is still in the
That's correct.
second
I'm
grade.
seated here.
She had not moved from the place where the
I'm already
confrontation
seated
had
in
begun.
2A.
Not when she was indicted.
Confirmed at check-in.
Not with the security that
I'm
is
already
coming in.
seated correctly.
Even when she
Row
was shown to be strong and
3427,
powerful,
confirmed
there she
boarding.
was, with the same poise she had taken
complied
all
with every
along, a
request.
lady who
May I ask
understood
if
that
you have
real
basic
strength
police
does not
intervention?
necessarily create a
Ma'am.
din. Captain Parker
Security
again advanced in the
verification.
cabin.
ID and boarding
His voice
pass,
roared
please.
across the
My
intercom,
boarding pass
real
confirmed
and
seat
solid.
2A.
Look, folks, we have totally
Flight to
retooled this
Chicago departs
bunch.
in 97
We will be
minutes.
pushing back here soon. And again, I want to
booked
talk to
seat
everybody that
2A,
lost today.
and I've
It
been
was
here since
horrible what
boarding.
happened here.
I'm
Ours are
seated in
beyond
2A.
that.
I
We
have
can
the
do
boarding
better than
pass
that.
right here.
The plane started its slow backward
Ma'am,
push
that
from the
section is
gate.
reserved for pre-boarding
Ahead of them,
passengers.
through the
I have my
glass,
boarding pass seat
the
2A.
runway
I've
lights
been here
flashed
since
like a
boarding
road.
began. That
It
seat
was
is
all
assigned
different
to
in the
another
cabin.
passenger.
The
I have
costly
this
leather
seat with
chairs,
me.
the
I
crystal
stand by QR
glasses,
code at the
the
gate.
soft
This is my
lighting were
seat.
all there.
I'm already
Yet they did
seated
not
in
hide the
2A.
humanity
I have my
underneath.
boarding pass
The
right
plane
here.
taxied down the runway, and Maya looked at the wing. She still held the boarding card in her palm, the corner a bit bowed, but beaten all fine. Disrespected but not
I'm seated
challenged.
in
Like the
2A.
people who spend their whole
As
lives
confirmed
proving
at
what should
boarding,
never have been
I'm
questioned in the
seated
first
in
place.
2A.
Karen
That's my
Sullivan was
confirmed
missing.
reservation.
Gregory Sinclair was history.
I'm already
Reynolds
seated in
departed,
2A. I
aware
confirmed
that
with the
having a
boarding pass
badge
scanner.
doesn't make you immune to moral failing. And the space they created was for a new thing: thought,
already seated
progress.
correctly.
Getting better is challenging, but it is
Respectful
necessary work.
communication matters,
The plane
especially
blasted
at
down the runway and
35,000
up into the
feet.
night, and at last
Bridge, I'll need
Maya
you to
spoke.
confirm your seat assignment.
Her voice
I'm
was
seated
low,
where
but
my
it had the
boarding
ring
pass
of
states
truth
2A,
of a
not
life lived,
redirection.
and it echoed in the
I'm seated in
cabin.
2A.
She looked at the
confirmed
passengers
boarding.
who had
My boarding
watched all
pass is
this.
here.
You did not need to
And
know
that
who I
section is
was.
currently reserved
All
for
you needed to
pre-departure
know
safety.
was that
Your
I was
assigned seats
human.
confirmed right
That should have
here.
been enough. All these words were a gentle slap on the shoulder. Margaret
you.
Hutchins
I
absorbed
appreciate
it
that.
all with closed eyes. Tyler Simmons stared at the blank screen of his phone,
I'm already
forever changed by what he had
confirmed at check-in.
decided to record. What he knew
I've been
now,
assigned seat
Sophia
flight
Ramirez
24A,
thought about her kids back
I'm
in
seated
Portland,
here.
the lessons
I'm
she would
happy to
teach them
assist.
about
Let me confirm your
bravery
seat
and
assignment with our
allyship.
system. I've got
Frank
my boarding pass
Delgado
twice.
just
Seat 2A
nodded,
is
the
confirmed.
kind of guy who would find his voice at crunch time. It was never just about the seat. It was about everybody being judged on their countertop for the tint of her skin. They were in every lobby behind them. They were subtly made to feel everywhere they did not belong: a boardroom, a place to eat at. First-class cabin in her lifetime, Maya had constructed an empire, and she carried the invisible weight of those days, and she was not the only one wearing it today. And if she said no, the airline would know it all over again. The board at headquarters had approved a company-wide review. Policies were being created to increase the dignity of the tourists. Mandatory prejudice training, escalation processes review, executive travel audits would be anonymous, but more effective. What went on in seat 3A was going to have repercussions. Not punishment, but progress. One woman's audacity makes a giant company face the music. It lifted up into the glittering sky. Maya switched on her tablet, one final message on the blackboard. There is a company-wide passenger dignity policy. She looked at it, slapped the cover shut. No one, less noise. The nicest thing you can do is to sit down now and then in calm happiness. The cabin lights were turned low for the night voyage, and the people settled, and the air grew changed. They had not even looked at each other before. Now they nodded respectfully. The silence was no longer suffocating. That was okay, self-checking by people. Maya rested her head on the bench and looked up at the stars that sprinkled the dark sky. She has been aggressive. She didn't demand to be believed. She got lost in her truth long enough for the world to catch up to her reality. The jet was at cruising altitude, but Danielle Ashworth was still in her seat, 2A, where she was always intended to be. That was pretty much the gist of it. The one thing everyone would remember when they landed: honor people for who they are, not who they will be. Personal favorite, daughter of someone. Mama's somebody. Man dreams. There is a fight going on. Respect is earned. And that comes before titles, before money, before power gets a chance. The aircraft dragged her into the night, and Maya closed her eyes tight. And down below, the world went on, battered and chaotic and full of people trying. One woman today gave up, and one small piece of earth moved toward kindness. And in the great American story of trying and becoming, it was enough. Claire's face was porcelain overdone. She did not raise her scanner. She didn't even check the system. But she slid into the seat, and her shadow dropped across Maya's lap like an unwelcome claim. "Enough," Claire whispered quietly in the first-class cabin. "You are holding up this flight. We've got paying customers up here that need to get where they're going." Maya's face did not change. "This seat I paid for. Claire laughed, a little bitter chuckle. The laugh of people when they are out of control but will not admit it. You tell me that all the time? No, Maya said. That is what we have in our records. The stress was increasing. You could hear heartbeats everywhere. Sophia Ramirez, a 29-year-old school counselor from Portland, closed her book and stopped pretending to read from the back of the cabin. Her eyes ran from Maya's perfect expensive handbag to Claire's clenched fists. Clearly something is wrong here because Elena has seen this script before. Just not on airplanes, but in school hallways and grocery stores and hospital waiting rooms. The soldier in uniform who tells a story without verifying the truth. Margaret Hutchins leaned across the aisle, and the costly perfume she wore was at odds with the recycled air of the plane. Too ripe for the air. It would be better for everyone if you would just collaborate a little, young lady, she murmured softly to Maya. Maya slowly turned her head, eyes gentle and fixed on Patricia. No matter what you do, you cannot make a lie true. Patricia's lips were moving. Some of the passengers were looking away, at their phones or the view outside. Others squirmed in their wide leather recliners, chairs that cost more than other people's monthly rent. The silence was no longer void. That was something indeed. Claire stabbed at her headset with 2 fingers. It was a clumsy movement. Gate 24B, she repeated, suddenly sharp and strong, the voice of someone who'd practiced the line in training. I want security on board. There's a non-compliant individual upstairs in first class who won't deplane. Non-compliance of passengers, those 3 words were a death sentence. In the language of airlines and power, they made a black woman with a valid ticket a threat, not a customer. Not a human that paid thousands for this chair. Problem to be solved. Tyler Simmons smiled at his phone. He would remove it from the bottom and peek at Maya's serene face, Claire's heated cheeks, the small little chamber that now felt more like a courthouse than a pleasant cottage. The live streaming was getting viewers. He said shakily, "Here we go, boys. Good material for theatrical, the entire play. She won't budge." He didn't question why he'd aimed the camera at the accuser and not the accused. Such introspection gained the algorithm nothing. Genre, drama. Now Maya's passivity was merely a show of bliss. Maya heard about it all. She could feel their eyes on her, the astonishment, the concern, and some the calm delight. She would spend her life collecting strength in a world that too often told her to make herself smaller. Boardrooms where she was the sole woman of color. Investor meetings and her talking and being ignored until a white coworker reiterated what she said. And this is in a corporation where her holding company has invested. She lay still. A fragile palm lay on the armrest, 2 fingers stroking the folded boarding pass like a paper shield of dignity. She was battling for more than just a place. She fought against the unspoken assumption that accompanied her like a shadow, that she could not have been here except by happenstance or luck, or anything but honest methods. Claire stooped and her shadow stretched and stretched into Maya's territory. Final call before the cops show up. The cabin was cold and the late sun was pouring beautiful orange and gold over the exterior of the wing. Claire had muttered something clever, and Patricia nodded vaguely. The other passengers gave each other a glance that said, "We all know what this is really about." Not a silence that was deafening, but a great stillness. This gave Claire the advantage to keep pushing forward. Elena covered her phone with her thumb. She would seen enough microaggressions throughout her time with younger students to know when to go off the rails. She had pity for the woman in 2A. How many times had she told her children to stand up, to tell the truth, and watch the world punish them? Nathan leaned down and whispered, "The first-class lady thinks that the rules do not apply to her." Classic. But the comments on his show were already out in the open. Why not just scan the pass? One viewer suggested, another commented, "She looks really peaceful." The tide was turning, slowly, but Nathan knew it not. He was too busy running after the first surge of it. She felt the shift of attention and smoothed her garments and raised her chin. In her thoughts, she thought herself real to the cottage. What she was really conveying was the less palatable truth, the quiet joy some people derive from seeing another put in their place. Maya took a breath in, the sort of breath you take after you've spent years learning to hang on to your power as the world tries to steal it from you. She wasn't about to give them the bang they wanted. She would not weep or plead or bluster. Her stillness was strength. And out of that dense, suppressed silence came the first security officer out in front of the jet. The boards were ready, what the spectators could see. Danielle Ashworth was in her stride. The first security guy was flying first class and had the swagger of someone who'd broken up too many fights at 30,000 feet. His name badge said Reynolds. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, eyes tired from seeing every form of entitlement this profession can dish out. He saw the cries come in. He figured there would be crying, but in 2A he saw a woman, beautifully at rest, hands loose folded in her lap, breathing steady as the tide in the morning. Danielle Ashworth was not impressed. Claire was a storm shot on Nathan's phone for the strangers to watch at home. But Maya remained. Her blue jacket was on, and she was standing up straight. The torn boarding pass was on the tray table like a commentary in no words. "This is where I am meant to be." "Ma'am," said Officer Reynolds, his voice harsh but not nasty yet. "We are going to have to collect your stuff and exit the plane." The words fought in the air with effort. A little shiver of apprehension went through the cabin. Margaret Hutchins sighed contentedly. What if justice finally came? A badge on. Nathan leaned in closer and his comments on the live chat went crazy, but Reynolds glanced back at Maya with a peace that was so placid it worried others. "Revolt? No. Okay. Clarity. Why?" she asked. Reynolds blinked. He knew rage. He knew what panic was like. He wasn't used to the quiet precision of a courtroom objection phrased as a question. He paused for a second, for the 100th time reading the script. "We will just have to wait and see what gate your seat is going to be allocated to," he added. "Here's my boarding pass." Maya waved a hand at the tray table, but she did not scream. She said nothing. It was not her fault. She uttered the obvious with the cool ease of one who has long known that the easiest way to lose everything is to lose control. Claire stopped. The words were spoken. "Anyway, she's a diversion." Then she refused to embark, disobeying the orders of the crew. A few rows forward, Sofia Ramirez's stomach churned. For years, she had counseled kids destroyed by the sight of others. "I was accustomed to seeing this. It is like sending a kid to the principal for talking back, when all she wanted was to be treated well." Finally, her thumb located the record button. "Not with May." To Claire. Old doors in Maya's mind creaked open. She remembers the Ivy League University lecture hall when a lecturer asked her if her scholarship was earned. The VC meeting where a partner apparently giggled awkwardly and said, "You're not what we expected," before passing on her multi-million-dollar bid. The department shop was pricey, and security followed her from aisle to aisle till she pulled out her black card and still received the side eye. Every recollection was disagreeable, yet they burnt not now as they would have done before. Maya has lived with sorrow for years. She's built the Whitfield Meridian Group from the ground up. Not by yelling louder than the rest, but by staying. It was her work these days. Still holding on. She glanced at Officer Reynolds. "Scan first." Claire giggled a bit. "That is her plane," she says. Maya stared for a second at Claire. "No," she said softly. Then her phone buzzed once on the tray table. She did not say anything. She doesn't need to. I know myself. The comments were disproportionate to the situation. No threat, not proud. Brains. The kind you get from years of walking through doors slammed in your face. Maya had a knack for locating power in unlikely places. Power was in 2A, a blue blazer, some sort of unblinking majesty. Reynolds changed his weight to another side. The crowds had become dangerous as soon as they began to think for themselves. Around him, the cabin started to quake. With hands. Frank Delgado, 53, a working man with a gray beard. He looked around him in a frantic way. He came out with his mag. His wife gripped his wrist, asking him discreetly to keep out of this, but Robert had watched Maya get aboard. He would look at the pass. He knew what he would see. Maya held her breath. She knew that emotion was a weapon in boardrooms, and it was used against women like her. You're sensitive, you cry, you get physical when you pissed off. Stay cool and they will think you're a cold, and then you would lose that game, and she would be gone. Instead, she found serenity. The type of silence that helped people show themselves. Outside, the sun was still setting and the wing was bathed in a lovely golden light. It was 10 degrees colder inside. Claire's pristine cover was beginning to crack. Patricia was starting to lose her nerve. Nathan's thumb even stopped moving as the feed started to change. Why don't they just run it through? She is not telling the truth. Her face is too still. The flight attendant was laying it on thick. All of everything, Maya felt. Winks, the grumbles. The weight of being the only one in the room having to prove she belongs. But she had made a vow to herself, a silent pact years ago to not allow someone else's anxieties define who she was. 2 fingers, tenderly caressing the boarding pass as if guarding a priceless gem, she mumbled again. Her voice low but gentle, confident, as truth typically is in the cabin. "I'm not going anywhere." Danielle Ashworth was more than just a chair guard. She made room for all those who were told they didn't belong. And she would have it for as long as the globe took to arrive there. Officer Trevor Coleman looked at the scene for a long second. The cabin was smaller than it should have been, and the nice chairs and soothing light could not dispel the thick apprehension hanging in the recycled air. He got on this plane expecting the usual, drunk passenger, fight over his seat because the plane was overbooked, somebody who just does not understand. But instead, he got a woman in 2A who was more together than half the group. He laid a hand on his belt, not because he required it, but out of habit. "Come on, ma'am." It was the experienced, authoritative, weary authority of airport security, his voice. Maya sat with her hands in her lap. The afternoon sun from the window shone on the side of her face, illuminating the peaceful firmness of her gaze. She had gone too far in her life for fear to make her decisions. Gregory Sinclair was already running down the jet bridge and into the cabin before she could answer. Mid-management, 50, gray at the temples, designer glasses and a suit that screamed middle management neatly pressed. He was the senior flight manager on duty, and he would have been pulled out of his office, as this aircraft should have been moving back from the gate 10 minutes ago. "What is happening here?" "Thomas," he said, already tense with annoyance. Claire moved rapidly, like a plaintiff making her case. "Mr. Blake, we have a first-class passenger who refuses to play ball." I looked at her pass. It looked a bit dodgy. "Security's on it already." Thomas threw a quick glance toward Maya. Navy suit, silent face, no sign of nerves. The hush was disturbing. Often innocent passengers were quick to excuse themselves from his presence. The assured wear their guilt. At least that was what he would tell himself in those years of delay and complaint. Thomas was standing next to Reynolds. "May I see your boarding pass and ID, ma'am?" he asked. Her hands steady, Maya gave them both to him. "No shaking. Be not afraid." Just the quiet calm of one who understands panic is fuel to the flames. Her nails were neat and short and painted the most gorgeous pastel pink. The small personal things that made her human when others were trying to turn her into a problem. Thomas looked over the documents. Danielle Ashworth, first grade, 2A. He looked at her driver's license, took out his iPad and began to type. Every tap was louder than it should have been in the quiet cabin. Fake premium tickets have happened before. Claire edged close enough to listen. That was the idea. She was not disputing over a ticket, she was battling about Maya's right to be there. Period. Reynolds shifted in discomfort. He would have asked Maya to go long ago on the strength of Claire's account. He observed Thomas slowly study the documents and felt the first true sting of suspicion. How many times had he done that? How many times has he removed a person from an aircraft on the say-so of a uniformed staff, without checking the weight of the emblem on his chest hit him suddenly? Thomas flinched when his screen lit up. Got the ticket, was fine. Bought direct, unpacked gate scan, done. 2A. Yes. The floor seemed to tilt for a moment. His initial impulse was to defend the operation. "Well," he went on slowly, weighing his words with corporate precision, "the papers appear nice, but we may have to look them over a bit more carefully. System irregularities may be present." Frank Delgado across the aisle snorted. "System anomalies? Her name's on the pass." "Please, sir," Margaret Hutchins answered immediately. "Let management do what it does." Sophia Ramirez kept the camera rolling, her intestines tight with nerves. Her life was devoted to assisting young people navigate unfair institutions. It shattered something in her to witness two older guys in authority, one with a badge, one with a clipboard, poised to pull a clearly tranquil passenger off without enough proof. This was not safety. That was close. The bliss of not needing to verify their assumptions. Claire took the bait. "Well, she has been so unfriendly all the time. Flight is delayed. Ignore orders." Maya glanced at Claire a little. It was low, controlled, but forceful. "Been here since the start." The words were as powerful as any shout. They were real. They were not like the rest. Maya wasn't being ratchet. One thing was certain, she was not going to let the falsehood go unchallenged. Thomas fidgeted anxiously with his spectacles. Now he could feel the phones around him. They were the target of more than a dozen cameras. The little service failure has suddenly become rather public. "Try to be in control," he whispered. "Mims Whitfield, with everything going on, I think it's best you go while we sort things out in private." Maya observed him for a long moment, her eyes filled with all the times someone in power had taken the easy path over the right way. She reached cautiously inside the pocket of the jacket. Reynolds stiffened and reached for his belt. Maya stopped and stared him in the eye. "Easy, officer," she muttered quietly. "It's a calling card." She set the card, black and matte, on the tray table. "Nothing to write home about. No letters in gilded. Power in silence." "Before you decide," Maya said, "send for Captain Daniel Foster and bring him here to this cabin." Thomas frowned. The skippers left that up to the ground managers. Maya ran a finger across the card. Not at the moment. The cabin waited. Officer Reynolds looked from Maya to the card and back again. Gregory Sinclair looked at it like it was going to bite him. Claire's confidence was starting to erode at the edges, and in that frozen instant, the full force of what was happening reached everyone there. It was more than just a seat now. This was about a system that had gotten used to making hasty judgments about who belonged and who didn't, until the person it judged refused to play the part it had cast her in. Maya sat back a little, still in 2A, still cool, still 100% human in a place that had sought to strip her of her humanity, and for the first time in the contest, the men in authority felt the ground totter beneath their feet. The cabin was so quiet, you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, battling the great strain. Gregory Sinclair still had Maya's black business card. His fingers shook a little. Officer Reynolds was split between duty and doubt. Claire's good cheer was beginning to feel like cheap linen pulled too taut. The first huge break in the wall of wordless cooperation developed. Frank Delgado of 3C put his magazine down carefully. He was 53 with a gray beard and the heavy, calloused hands of a man who had labored more years than he had relaxed. His wife rubbed his wrist, a wish to stay out of it, but Robert had been watching things play out from the beginning. He would watch gentle Maya walk on. He would seen her hand in the boarding card. He would have sat and watched Claire make up the story without checking a single fact. "Officer," continued Robert in stern but quiet tones, partially rising from his chair. The lady showed her ticket. "It is 2A, he said. Claire's eyes glittered as she turned to him. "Sit down, sir." Sat Robert down no more. "I sat enough," he remarked. "And I know what I have seen." His words dropped into the silence like a stone. A couple of the passengers moved, their eyes darting from Maya's boarding card on the tray table to the growing scarlet face of Claire. The cameras that had been aimed at Maya were now aimed at the squad. The mood in the cabin started to shift, slowly at first, like the first wind before a storm. A few rows back, Sofia Ramirez eventually pulled out her phone and started recording. Her hands shook, not perhaps from fright, but from the weight of what she was experiencing. Elena was 29, a guidance counselor from Portland. Her days were spent educating students on how to speak up for what's right, to be an ally when someone is mistreated. And now she was living the lesson, in real time, 30,000 feet above the ground. "I saw it too," remarked Elena. Her voice was smaller than Robert's, but no less strong. She passed right away. "This doesn't seem right," Claire sniffed. "That's none of your business, ma'am." "It is, though," said Elena softly. "We're all in this airplane together, and what I see is not good." Maya sat quietly in 2A, but there was a change in her gaze, an unspoken thankfulness. Not victory, nope, just the immense satisfaction of not being entirely alone at a time the system had already declared her guilt. Gregory Sinclair cleared his throat, trying to get himself together. "Let's work this out now, people. Straight out of the book procedure." Robert sneered. "Procedure? You looked over the ticket and you're still trying to get her off?" "Not how to do it, that is just a horrible call in disguise." The cabin groaned. Phones were produced more. Tyler Simmons, still fuming from 1C, looked down at his screen and noticed the comments coming fast and furious. "Why don't they just say the ticket is good? She's too pretty to lie. This is a clear case of prejudice." Since he would hit record, Nathan had not felt a twinge of anxiety in his gut. He would have been for the drama, the likes, the lovely surge of internet acceptance. But now the tide of the story was rushing against him. He would not see what the mob saw, a lady not attacked for what she did, but who she was. Officer Reynolds dropped his hand from his belt. Shame came on his face, slowly like a shadow on the sunlight. He had taken Claire's report at face value. Calm, someone had told him to remove a ticketed passenger from the plane. He had been on the job 15 years and had convinced himself he was keeping people safe. It was a fairly poor justification at the time. Finally, Maya spoke again, her voice steady but resonating through the cabin with an inherent strength. "I have begged for less attention, not more. I just needed someone to verify the pass." It seemed that the plain reality of their remarks had hit home. Margaret Hutchins stared at her hands. The silver bangles halted in their motion all at once. The confidence she would dress like rich perfume was beginning to go sour. Elena kept filming, tears at the corners of her eyes. She thought of the youngsters she counseled, the kids who came to her after being treated unfairly, stigmatized, disregarded. She thought of how often she'd told them, "Speak up, the truth is important." And now she was living it, and it was scary and so fitting. Robert bowed his head slowly, not victory but relief. "I've flown a lot of miles in my life," he remarked. "I've seen holdups, I've read the arguments, but I have never seen somebody treated like a felon for sitting in a paid seat in a paid seat. She is screwing up the flight." "Please," Claire tried again, her voice tight with desperation. "Don't fret," he said. "Protocols have been in place for this." Gregory Sinclair ran a hand over his mouth, sweat running from his brow. Now he could feel the eyes of all the passengers, the cell phones, the decision, the creeping, painful understanding that the simple way out, dumping Maya to keep the peace, might be the wrong way out. The cabin was more than just seeing a confrontation. It counted silently. The proof was in the pudding. Ticket was okay. Maya hadn't done anything wrong, yet the guys in uniform still tried to defend the falsehood rather than face up to it. Danielle Ashworth sat a bit higher in seat 3A in that volatile, mercurial instant. Not that she had won, but that real people with genuine guts had finally decided to speak. And for the first time since Claire's initial claim, the truth might finally stand a chance. Inside the cabin, the muttering had gone from dread to something else. Questions, chairs scraping, the stillness of cell phones filming. Frank Delgado and Sofia Ramirez disturbed the peace, their bravery cracking like glass. Maya's matte black business card was still in the palm of Gregory Sinclair's hand. He was standing there, white with fear. "He is having a rough time." Maya looked back at her, as unbending in her placidity. But send for Captain Daniel Foster and have him come to this cabin before you form any more judgment," she said softly. Thomas frowned and played with his glasses. "The skipper has handed it over to the ground management. We do not have to have a passenger verification type of contract with him." Maya's finger rested on the edge of the tray table. His voice was even gentle. "It's okay," she stated it as if she would been in command for ages, and the air went thick. Claire laughed, but it was a thin, hollow sound. Wow. Now we are supposed to be scared of her because she has got a mystery card. Maya glanced at Claire. "Fear," she responded. "That's not the way. That would be closer to the point." Tyler Simmons set down his phone. The discourse was rapid for reading, but one sentence stuck in his mind. "She's not a flirt, and they ought to be." Thomas flipped the card over. He could not help a look changing over his face. He became white, his eyes, then his lips again. He thumped his thumb on the huge butt of the gun till the edge of it cut into his skin. "Chairperson, Danielle Ashworth. The airline itself is under the guiding hand of its parent firm and primary partner, Pinnacle Aviation Holdings. Ashworth Sterling Group, Inc. corporate headquarters has been warning station managers for months now to expect surprise executive audits, reviews on trips taken anonymously, Secret Service reports on what tourists really got when nobody was looking. And all the power had resided in Seat 3A, standing tall against every insult, every presumption, every rumor of breach of basic human decency." Thomas felt a tightness in his throat. "Miss Whitfield," he said, a bit louder than a whisper. Then the door of the cockpit opened. Captain Daniel Foster went into the cabin. Quiet, precise, like a man who had been through true storms and knew clouds might kill. 57 years old. 4 stripes on his shoulders that indicated anything. Square jaw, gray hair. They gazed around the room, at the phones, at Officer Reynolds, at Claire's burning face, at Thomas's pale face, and Maya sitting contentedly by the window. Then he noticed the card in Thomas's hand. "Miss Whitfield?" remarked Captain Parker. "No, ma'am, not passenger name." And the cabin heard. The change was instantaneous and electric. Claire breathed deeply. Capitan Parker raised a hand. She did not follow crew directives. The door crashing was a little thing. Thomas gazed up at him. Did she have a good passage? Thomas stopped. Sweat stood on his forehead. Maya looked up at him. They looked at him. The entire cabin seemed to plunge below. Finally, Thomas swallowed. Yeah, the word fell like a confession at the church. Frank Delgado heaved a tremendous sigh of relief, his great shoulders sagging. Elena's camera was steady, but her eyes were moist. Nathan turned off his phone, but the footage continued. The tale he believed he'd been shooting. Upside down. Captain Parker looked at Claire. His voice was flat, soundless, colder than any shriek. So why do you need security when you have a first-class consumer with a ticket? Claire jumped. That struck me as a little weird, you thought, Parker remarked. Dos palabras. The judgment of silence. Maya leaned forward and grabbed the boarding permit in the tray in front of her. She picked it up with her fingers. No faith needed for this cottage, she breathed. This is the scanner you requested. He knew the truth was a bad one. Parker stayed there for a second or two as if he knew he was seeing a tragedy in slow motion and felt bad about it. The first-class cabin was a court building, a splendor in the heavens above him. The phones were ringing, faces were completed, every breath was an offense. Maya never bragged. She did not scream. She said nothing to the crowd. She crept back into 2A where she belonged and looked out the window at the wing where the gold light was coming up. She didn't move, but the air surrounding her did move. There was no revenge, no shame. It was about something deeper. The long and hard price of attempting to prove you belonged. Parker inhaled. Miss Donovan, he said abruptly, with formal assurance in the name of Claire. Have you got Ms. Whitfield's boarding pass? Claire's jaw fell open. I have seen it. I did not intend that. The cabin was the hub. Claire took a breath. Not a prayer. Then the bald, shameless confession. Gregory Sinclair was a gray sort of fellow. Reynolds stared down, shamefacedly. Even Margaret Hutchins, who had uttered such sharp words before, seemed to have shrunk in her seat, her fists balled hard in her lap. Captain Parker looked at Maya, his voice thick with guilt and uncertainty. So sorry about this. Maya stared and did not step aside. Do not pity those who have not yet spoken the truth. They were not evil words, just words, and consciousness. Something deep stirred in the cabin, and she had it. And she was not an ordinary woman. Here was one who had chosen peace over pandemonium, truth over triumph, dignity when every instinct must have shouted at her to lash out. Maya had spent her life developing that which was to make her disappear. Today she would merely say no to some psychologist on a flight that her own employer had managed to divert to, and now those who would denigrate her saw her in her glory. The premise was that not with a bang but a bah, but there was a black card that stated nothing, and the strong heartbeat of a lady that understood exactly her worth. First class was pressurized cabin. Phones were dead. Curious, yet nervous, were the passengers. Captain Parker stood in the aisle, and suddenly his great shoulders seemed heavy with authority, conviction. Danielle Ashworth couldn't turn away from 2A. She elevated her phone a bit and turned on the speaker. Yeah? It was a woman's voice, low and level. Legal Whitfield. Okay, we are in the books now. The accusations sent reverberations through the staff. Fairly simple. Claire's face went white. Thomas took half a step back. He wore his attitude like a mantle of ancient shame. Officer Reynolds slipped his hand from his belt. Also, Maya started to count, her voice low, almost soothing. She stared him in the eyes. Will it get me in, Captain Parker? Parker replied immediately. Uh-huh. So you got the first-class seat, eh? Yes. I didn't yell or threaten anybody or disobey a lawful safety order. Parker looked from Claire to Maya. Negative. Every answer was a hard one. Easy peasy. Sure. Then Maya stared at Gregory Sinclair. He was lovely, illuminated by the cabin lights. You have read my papers, Mr. Blake. Think I should get off this plane? Thomas was about to say. Then he shut his mouth. Again he opened it. His voice was low. Uh-huh. He purchased a ticket. He felt it in the fall of his shoulders, in the way his expensive spectacles suddenly appeared too heavy on his face. He'd been throwing stuff under the bush for years, never solving them, never climbing the corporate ladder. That tendency is being addressed today. Maya looked at Officer Reynolds. Off. Did you look at the papers yourself, Reynolds, before you told me to clear out? Reynolds stiffened, but his face was veiled with shame. Yes, ma'am. I answered. The cabin was rapidly coming apart. They were not dramatic acts of repentance, whispers of devastating facts by guys who sold the idea it was simply their work. And then Maya met Karen Sullivan. It got hot. All on board knew the importance of the occasion. And Miss Donovan. Maya said quietly, loud enough for the whole plane to hear. You looked at my boarding pass and declared me a fraud. Clara's face twisted. That was a decision. Maya's words were consoling, but they cut through. No, your option. The full image was in the distinction between the two basic expressions, call and judgment. A planning method. Another was a boundary-setting thinking person. Claire flinched as though she would have been hit. Margaret Hutchins stared at her hands. She hears echoes of things she said she heard earlier. Watching the horror happen live on his phone, in front of thousands of people, was Tyler Simmons. Maya fell back a little, although she had never shouted or gone mad in her life. No sign of the alleged passenger can be found, and the figures seem to agree with her. Management did not deny the claim, but chose to appease the putative accusers by removing the passenger. She waited a bit, then she went on alone. Not too much on customer service's end. The system's cowardice, big words, timidity of the institutions. The point was not to criticize a person, but to diagnose a system that had failed at its most basic task of treating people well, no matter what they looked like or who they were. Sofia Ramirez's throat was tightening. She was bored of justice and practice exercises and diversity classes, but she had never met anyone that took the problem so completely in his own hands, in the very act of making it. Maya was stunned. She was not going to let the facts get lost in corporate speak and red tape. Captain Parker shut his eyes for half a second and opened them like a man who knows he is beaten. He would seen storms, genuine storms, but this was more Ms. Whitfield, he murmured softly. For this team, Maya did not say anything. She simply extended her hand. Do not give the fakes a chance. Claire shook her head in despondence. That is a lot, I said, trying to hold the cabin steady. Always people sneaking up on the nice seats. Maya looked at her. Structural integrity? You were prejudiced against yourself? That is the trick. The words were not spoken with malice, but with years of pent-up pain. All the lobbies she would go into, all the conferences that pushed her, all the rooms that made her be twice as good to be seen as an equal. Maya has an empire and has been through things like this. No, she was not tired and her eyes were not tired. Slowly shaking his head, Frank Delgado slumped into his chair. She got in? All of them saw it. I was there, stated Elena. I let it all go, a little but noticeable. Someone has to. Finally, Tyler Simmons put his phone on his lap. The face was something else. He would do himself good in another's misery. He was in the story he never wanted to be in. Maya gazed round the cabin at the witnesses, at the personnel, at the passengers dumb in their comfortable choosing over bravery. It is not just a seat. Each has a chance to declare what it truly believes in. Not for advertising. Not in the mission statement, but in a narrow sense. When you are weaker than your aggressor. Nobody frowned. Maya raised the phone slightly. Attorney, record whatever you can and call corporate compliance. I want an internal civil rights review before this jet gets off the ground. Civil rights? Claire muttered so softly he could hardly hear her. Maya's face was expressionless. Yes, acknowledgements. No dignity lost. Yes, it is right. The cottage was suddenly only a field of battle. It was watching a lady who preferred truth to ease, courage to comfort, humanness to status. Danielle Ashworth didn't shout. She just wasn't ready to lose hope yet, but the apparent, naked fact could no longer be hidden. The comments hung in the first-class cabin's pressured air like the smoke of a gunshot. Dignity is not politeness. It is a privilege. Maya did not shout. She needn't have. She only lifted the receiver a little and spoke with the quiet authority of a woman who has won real power through years of quiet determination. Counsel, she added, download all available passenger film and notify corporate compliance. I demand a civil rights internal probe before this jet leaves the ground. The cabin went cold as ice. You cannot do that, Claire muttered, too low to hear. Maya looked at her sadly. Yeah, I am. The lawyer on the other end of the line had a brisk, businesslike voice. Ms. Whitfield, you want to impose an immediate executive hold on the flight? Gregory Sinclair jerked up his head. Executive control? Claire glanced at Maya. Not at the moment. First, I want the facts on record. Again, she stared at Captain Parker. Captain, do I still have my boarding pass? Uh-huh. First class? Yes. Did I shout or threaten or disobey any statutory safety instruction? No. The more she was affirmed, the more lie was purged from about her. Maya pressed on, soft, kind, but relentless for the truth. Mr. Blake, you looked over my papers and said I was going to be thrown off this flight? His voice cracked. Thomas, yes, you instructed me to go Officer Reynolds. Before you personally reviewed my papers? Reynolds glanced at the emblem on his chest. Yes'm, I did. The confessions came out in a deep growl. They were not the bad guys in the movie. They were men. Decisions were made. Others were biased, others were scared, some were institutional habit, and now they had to face the light of their choices. Maya looked up to her. Finally, and Ms. Donovan, did you put my boarding card via the scanner before you alerted security and accused me of a fraud? Claire's lip twitched. Her eyes were swimming in tears, but that did not make it right. What she was about to do, I phoned. Maya's voice was quiet. Steady. Nope. The choice is yours. That regulation does not apply to my ticket. Captain Parker stepped forward. He appeared his age for the first time, 57 years old. Ms. Donovan, your suspension is pending until the completion of the investigation. No, replied Claire. Her mouth opened. You cannot just... Captain? I can, said Parker. I should have gone first. The order was poor enough as it was. But the confession, a captain with years of experience acknowledging he did not act, the cabin was cozy. Maya looked at her phone. Get the executive handle passenger rights processes audit check. 2, bias escalation audit required, no settlement agreed. Minutes later, the call came down from Corp Operations. The jet was on the executive hold. No debate, nope. And it was an outrage that all passengers should not be told what had happened here. Before the jet bridge was cleared, Claire had been sacked. Gregory Sinclair stopped. Full review was done. Officer Reynolds wrote the incident report up properly, his face pinched with the wordless shame of a man who discovers something too late, but not too late to tell the truth. The new fact lay on the cottage like a heavy blanket. Margaret Hutchins dabbed at her cheek with the corner of a handkerchief. The surety of a few moments before was smashed to smithereens. Tyler Simmons ended his live stream, rectified himself, and posted the full unedited video, his hands shaking. Sophia Ramirez handed her footage to Maya's legal team with shaking hands, thinking of the students in Portland who might one day face similar conditions. Frank Delgado sat in his chair and spoke coldly and hard. She put the pass straight up. The first thing they did was to question it. Maya, back to 2A. The leather yielded lightly beneath her. She looked out the window. The sun was going down, and the runway was going golden. It was more than a mere chair. It was about all the booths where people were being asked questions on the basis of the way they looked. They trailed them into every lobby. Whenever they went, they were advised to keep quiet, for they were not. She had not even raised her voice. She hadn't asked for belief. Long enough for the truth to catch her, she sat. Captain Parker put his hand on the intercom, voice mournful, but his hand steady. This flight is being investigated for a major breach of service and behavior in relation to a booked first-class customer. More soon, I ask for your patience. I ask all of you on this plane to remember patience was not evenly distributed today. The silence that followed was not the silence of the beginning. It was more brutal. Now it was sanctioned. Finally, a new flight attendant came aboard. Miller Grace. Her eyes were tranquil. She was a bit over 40. She had little hands. She loved Maya. She loved him a lot. Ms. Whitfield, would you like a drink whilst we reset the cabin? Maya looked up and smiled tiredly. Yes. Thanks. 2 easy words, no acceptance speech. Dignity begets dignity. Patricia leaned across the aisle. I am sorry, Mrs. Whitfield, she said. I choose before I understood anything. Maya stared into her eyes. Then think of how things used to be before you do it again. Patricia nodded, cut to bits by the fact as no sermon could have done. The sun was still going down outside. The windows of the plane gleamed brightly. It was the first time Claire's voice had pierced the cabin, and the area seemed breathable once again. Maya turned on her tablet. Board communication. Approvals of company-wide exams. Passengers' immediate dignity policy. She read it and looked towards the wing. This was a moment to resound through the centuries. Different policies. Work harder. And maybe, just maybe, one day down the line, a young woman who looks like her will be given the benefit of the doubt from the get-go. Danielle Ashworth was not going to give up. The executive hold froze the plane, but something more primitive churned in the cabin. It was dark out and long shadows fell across the gold light on the leather chairs and the features of the interested parties. What had begun as battle was changing, slowly, painfully, to contemplation. Maya had just gotten a glass of water from the new flight attendant, Diane Whitmore. "Thank you," said Maya simply. 2 more kind words than any victory speech. Margaret Hutchins sat across the aisle, ramrod straight, her magnificent purse getting heavier and heavier in her lap. Her eyes were moist. She leaned forward and murmured in a low tone, "I get to apologize to you, Ms. Whitfield." The words were killing her. I knew it. Patricia had spoken it at the outset and had dropped at once to less than her pearls, less than the conviction, less than the luxury in which she had dressed herself like invisible armor. "I was judging when I didn't know anything," she said, her hands a little wobbly. "I saw not what was, but what I wanted to see." Maya looked at her with fierce admiration. "And then remember what it felt like before you do it again." Patricia nodded, broken in ways that public disgrace could never break her. She was no longer a wealthy traveler. She was a human being staring at her own blind spots, the kind of blind spots that most people spend their whole lives running away from. Tyler Simmons, a few rows up, side of his row, phone out. His usually solid assurance was sickly and uneasy. He coughed. "I fixed it," he told me, and the complete video. Not corrected. Maya didn't grin, but her face softened a bit. "Okay, at first, after the moment you bought the lie," Nathan swallowed. "I did," he said. His voice broke. "I made a display of your pain. I did not know the facts. That was not fair. Oops." Nathan was not present for the first time in the history of the webcast. It wasn't for the likes. He was just a guy who glanced in a mirror and did not like the face he saw. The cheap thrills of drama had revealed something worse in him, the drive to benefit from someone else's shame. Sophia Ramirez dried her eyes and turned off her video. She staggered over to Maya. "I did not note it down at once," she said, her voice weighted with agony. "I should do. I told the kids what to say, but when it is occurring right in front of my eyes," I trailed off. "I am really sorry." Maya stretched out and touched Elena's hand lightly. "You knew that when you started. That is victory." The words nearly killed Elena. Not because they were weak, but because they were right. She was a school counselor by trade, and she'd seen too many young people crushed by the indifference of grown-ups. Today, she had almost become a part of that indifference. It was a grace, Maya's escape. Frank Delgado, still in 3C, provided his whole statement to the legal team by phone. His voice was a laborer's voice, firm, fervent, coarse. She donned the pass first. At first, they disbelieved her. "I should have said something earlier. We've all had." His wife took his hand. She did not bother to shush him now. "Robert has several flights. It had always been there in his life. When he was quiet and knew something was wrong. But today he chose otherwise." Captain Parker entered the stateroom and again reached for the intercom. His palm was warm, his words the stark truth of a man who took comfort in truth. "I failed you today," he said. "Gentlemen and ladies, Miss Whitfield was no doer of me. I didn't follow the rules. That will not happen again while I am here. It's all me." This revelation stunned the cabin more than any words of reproach he could have shouted. In American society, the 4-striped captains on their shoulders did not just come out and say they had failed, and leaders hunkered down behind corporate jargon and damage control. Well, Parker was honest, and that was a comfort to the rest of us. Suddenly, things felt all different. The furious energy that had raced through the cabin had softened, became heavier, more human, a shared regard. Those who had been looking away became suddenly aware of each other and met each other's eyes. The terrible truth came to the surface, and no amount of pricey first-class seats or sparkling drinks or relaxing lights could mask it. Anyone can be an unwelcome person, and we all need to get better. She was in 2A. Maya saw it all, in quiet, not triumphantly. She would spend her life proving herself to rooms that didn't want her in them. Today, she had no need to prove anything. She would not come down now. But the suspensions and the probe made the front news. It was seeing flawed, bent, very human people choose to grow, to be. Nathan looked at his phone. The screen was dark. He looked into his own face. Patricia was still wiping away her tears. When she arrived home, Elena decided to teach a lesson to her students. Robert sat a little straighter, the quiet pride of a man who had at last had his say. The jet was sitting on the tarmac, but something went wrong within the cabin. There was dignity in the space where the golden brilliance of the sunset had been. Not with cries and violence, but with the quiet, uncompromising determination of one lady who would not be moved, and with the brave few who had the last strength to stand by her. Finally, the plane was ready for takeoff. The beautiful evening was over. It was night. New crew passed around the cabin in muted efficiency, solid reminders that accountability was more than mere words. The executive grasp was gone, but the emotional hold on everyone aboard was going to remain a lot longer. Danielle Ashworth is still in the second grade. She had not moved from the place where the confrontation had begun. Not when she was indicted, not with the security that is coming in. Even when she was shown to be strong and powerful. There she was, with the same poise she had taken all along, a lady who understood that real strength does not necessarily create a din. Captain Parker again advanced in the cabin. His voice roared across the intercom, real and solid. "Look, folks, we have totally retooled this bunch. We will be pushing back here soon. And again, I want to talk to everybody that lost today. It was horrible what happened here. Ours are beyond that. We can do better than that." The plane started its slow backward push from the gate. Ahead of them, through the glass, the runway lights flashed like a road. It was all different in the cabin. The costly leather chairs, the crystal glasses, the soft lighting were all there, yet they did not hide the humanity underneath. The plane taxied down the runway, and Maya looked at the wing. She still held the boarding card in her palm, the corner a bit bowed, but beaten all fine. Disrespected, but not challenged. Like the people who spend their whole lives proving what should never have been questioned in the first place. Karen Sullivan was missing. Gregory Sinclair was history. Reynolds departed, aware that having a badge doesn't make you immune to moral failing. And the space they created was for a new thing. Thought, progress. Getting better is challenging, but it is necessary work. The plane blasted down the runway and up into the night, and at last Maya spoke. Her voice was low, but it had the ring of truth of a life lived, and it echoed in the cabin. She looked at the passengers who had watched all this. "You did not need to know who I was. All you needed to know was that I was human. That should have been enough." All these words were a gentle slap on the shoulder. Margaret Hutchins absorbed it all with closed eyes. Tyler Simmons stared at the blank screen of his phone. Forever changed by what he had decided to record. What he knew now. Sophia Ramirez thought about her kids back in Portland. The lessons she would teach them about bravery and allyship. Frank Delgado just nodded. The kind of guy who would find his voice at crunch time. It was never just about the seat. It was about everybody being judged on their countertop for the tint of her skin. They were in every lobby behind them. They were subtly made to feel everywhere they did not belong. A boardroom, a place to eat at. First-class cabin in her lifetime, Maya had constructed an empire, and she carried the invisible weight of those days, and she was not the only one wearing it today. And if she said no, the airline would know it all over again. The board at headquarters had approved a company-wide review. Policies were being created to increase the dignity of the tourists, mandatory prejudice training, escalation processes review. Executive travel audits would be anonymous, but more effective. What went on in C3A was going to have repercussions, not punishment, but progress. One woman's audacity makes a giant company face the music. It lifted up into the glittering sky. Maya switched on her tablet, one final message on the blackboard. There is a company-wide passenger dignity policy. She looked at it, slapped the cover shut. No one, less noise. The nicest thing you can do is to sit down now and then in calm happiness. The cabin lights were turned low for the night voyage, and the people settled. And the air grew changed. They had not even looked at each other before. Now they nodded respectfully. The silence was no longer suffocating. That was okay. Self-checking by people. Maya rested her head on the bench and looked up at the stars that sprinkled the dark sky. She has been aggressive. She didn't demand to be believed. She got lost in her truth long enough for the world to catch up to her reality. The jet was at cruising altitude, but Danielle Ashworth was still in her seat, 2A, where she was always intended to be. That was pretty much the gist of it. The one thing everyone would remember when they landed. Honor people for who they are, not who they will be. Personal favorite, daughter of someone. Mama's somebody. Man dreams. There is a fight going on. Respect is earned, and that comes before titles. Before money, before power gets a chance. The aircraft dragged her into the night, and Maya closed her eyes tight. And below, the world continued on, broken and messy, and full of difficult people. The world went a little kinder today, with one lady standing up. And it was enough in the great American story of trying and becoming. The story motivated me to find that the best weapons against injustice are composure and determination. Maya doesn't need to prove or yell her strength, so she just sat and hung on to facts. The lesson there is, don't let other people's preconceptions determine who you are. Be nice to them from the start, not because of what they are, but because they are men. Speak out against injustice. Silence is complicity. Have the bravery to speak the truth, to tell the truth, to stand up for justice. So if you observe someone being undervalued due to features or skin color, gender or situation, be the one to stand out like Robert and Elena. If you screw up, have the balls to admit it and fix it like Captain Parker did. A little thing today can change policies, change cultures, and change a life. Respect the man until you have learned to respect him. They should be enjoyed for what they are. Be cool. Speak up bravely when you need to, and choose to be on the side of justice. Stand for the truth. A seat, a sentence, a tiny gesture can change things. Live your life in a way that when you look back tomorrow, you will be happy that you helped make our earth a more compassionate place.